Hello, everyone. It's Fiona here from fionamarks.com, and I am back with another episode of Press Clippings. As you can see, I have here a chart for Afghanistan that I've taken the date as in Wikipedia when the nation was created. So one has to pick up a point in time for these things. And of course, Afghanistan is very much in the news at the moment, and it asks us all to reflect on suffering and on change and on what is right. And I was watching, Netflix has a 5-hour documentary sort of reflecting on September 11 and putting it in the context of Afghanistan. That, of course, got me greatly thinking about the actions we take in the moment that lead to consequences and time playing out. Because as an astrologer, you're always looking at moments and trying to work out what will happen in the future. And so it makes you very interested in looking at moments in the past, because you have some chance of seeing how those moments in time actually played out. So there were just a few things that I wanted to reflect on. One of the things that struck me was about the amount of suffering. I think that is something that perhaps strikes everyone in this situation. Just listening to Russia coming into Afghanistan in the late 1970s, and then the US funding the local people to try and hold on to what is in their land that they want to. So then there's this a great big battle and a lot of war and suffering, and then we have, time moving on and different factions having their own interpretations of what should take place in Afghanistan, which eventually leads up to this these events on September the 11th in 2001, which then kind of galvanizes in the US this decision to take action. And then we now have 20 years of being in Afghanistan and achieving some things, but maybe not achieving anything, and then a very rapid transition of power now to the Taliban. So it gets one thinking about what are dharmic actions to take, and what could be done, what are the choices, what would have played out, why did things happen the way that they did. So the few things that I want to reflect on is that as we look at this birth chart for the nation of Afghanistan in 1919, there are a few things that stand out. We've got the sun in the own home, we've got moon in Mula Trikona, but we have Mars and Venus debilitated. But the thing that comes to mind for me, I think what I was hearing and interested in when I watched that documentary, it made me think about Sthaana and Chesta, because Sthaana is how we appear to the outside world. It's what's perceivable, the impression that we give off, and the stance that we have in life. And I think that when we think about Afghanistan, endurance and struggle and survival seem to be really amazing, resilient skills that these people have, because this is just like a 50-year-old or 45 years of a lot of conflict, a lot of struggle and suffering, and yet this spirit is still here of the Afghani people. And so we definitely perceive that endurance in Afghanistan. And I'm contrasting it with the Shadbala, the really low Shadbala, which is calculated by how fast the planet is moving. And when it's moving very fast, we give it a low Shadbala score because it's not able to spend a lot of time in space. It's moving as fast as it can go. So it can't do all of the little dotting the I's and crossing the T's because it's really moving on to the next part of space. And you can see that at this particular birth chart time, we have very low Chesta for Saturn. And when we have low Chesta-Bala Saturn, it gives the person a sense that a lack of confidence in their resilience, that they're going to be able to face up to suffering, and that they want to perhaps even withdraw from life because it all seems like it's too much and they don't think that they're going to survive. And so I just think that that's a really interesting dual experience of this Saturn in this chart, to be at once very strong in the stance that one takes around resilience, but to feel inside a great fear of, will I be able to look suffering in the face? So it's a really interesting dynamic. And the other things that I was interested in looking at was these 2 points in time, the Russian invasion, because this is the moment where more recently these superpowers have now kind of chosen Afghanistan, unfortunately, as their theatre of play, of their theatre of war. And Russia has come in at this point in the late 70s to prop up or reinstate a communist government. And the US is in the middle of the Cold War with Russia. Russia's in the middle of the Cold War with the US. It seems to the US that they can't let this happen, that they can't allow Russia to dominate this country and make it a communist country, I'm guessing is what is the thinking. And then the US doesn't go in with troops itself, having just been able to get out of Vietnam, which was a very long, drawn-out conflict as well. So they're not sending troops in, but they decide to fund any factions in Afghanistan that are willing to resist the Russian presence. And I just think about, why was that the choice that was made? And once again, I'm obsessed with Shadbala. Let's look at the Shadbala at the time. So this is the Shadbala at the time. It doesn't relate to this chart. So any chart that you would look at for this particular day, nearly Christmas Day, 1979, the sun is getting a low Ayana Bala score because it's right there, just very, very, very close to this solstice point here between Sagittarius and Capricorn. So regardless of whichever chart you look at, we've got low Ayana Bala and low Chesta-Bala. And what does that tell us? If you guys have been following the podcast, you know we had a great conversation about the sun's Chesta-Bala and its Ayana Bala. And when it is low in Chesta-Bala, the sun, instead of being confident to stand up the front and stand up for what it believes in, be at the front, be like a lighthouse or a beam that people can see the inspiration, that leader is of the sun's energy, very clear guiding light. That would be high in Chesta-Bala. When it's low in Chesta-Bala, then it can't stand at the front there. It's behind the scenes, and it doesn't have that confidence in itself. That Chesta-Bala energy is all about confidence. And so what do we see is that the US went in behind the scenes, and in some ways Russia went in behind the scenes as well, because they had sort of signed a treaty with the previous communist Afghani government. And so they are also kind of coming in behind something. And then you've got the US, instead of standing up the front and being very clear and a guiding light, they're just operating through funding anybody who's willing to resist. And then also what we have with low Ayana Bala for the sun is that when Ayana Bala is high with the sun, we see a very principled and noble approach to conflict and adversity. Whereas when Ayana Bala is low, we see, willing to make deals with anyone or compromise anything to get to that, what we see as being the important goal. So sometimes even throw people under the bus, right? Which is a very non-solar energy. Solar energy is all about protecting those in our sphere. But when the sun has low Ayana bala, we can see this sort of win at all costs approach. So just interesting, the dynamics that happen around this, because in some ways, when I was watching this documentary about September 11 and all the things that led into that and came from that, one thinks about how, if this moment in time, what would have happened if the US had said, whatever, okay, you know, it's not my fight, I'm not going in there. I'm going to allow it to be a communist country, or, you know, it could be a communist country. I know you can't put yourself back in time, and I wasn't there, and, you know, I don't know all of the politics that were going on, but this challenge of resolving our karma here in the material world is to be able to witness, stay conscious, and to choose our reaction. And in fact, in some ways, isn't it? It's not reacting, it's allowing karma to play out, even when that entails suffering, with that acceptance that that's what I've come here for, is to resolve the karma. And here is a moment, I wonder what would have happened. When I'm watching that documentary, my thought is, I wonder what would have happened if Russia had gone in and made Afghanistan a communist nation. I'm not saying that that is a good thing or should have happened, but I wonder, that was a moment where, what would have happened? But we see here that there are some things set up for that. And we also see that Venus was equally low in Ayana bala. And when Venus is low in Ayana bala, one of the things that happens is we don't know, we can't tell the value of a conflict, and we pay too much for it. So I just thought there was some really interesting dynamics in this Russian invasion chart. And then, of course, we want to have a look at September 11, because then here's another moment in time where there's an enormous action that comes into the US, and the whole world is shocked, and Americans are shocked. I can't even imagine what that means, to see this happening in front of your eyes. And so this action comes, and there's this potential to accept that action, to accept that this is a ripple, and that this is a tragedy, and to mourn this event, and to see as how can we heal this wound and move to peace. Now, I'm not saying that anybody has that kind of consciousness or ability to do that, but one could be receptive to this action and absorb it and move forward from a place then of stillness. And how do we build relationships, and how do we build peace? However, naturally, of course, there is also what most of us feel when we receive an action, like being slapped in the face or punched or hit or hurt in any way, is that we want to hit back, we want to react. And then we set off a whole new chain of karma when we react. And so you look at this moment in time and we think, what is going on in this moment of time? And we actually have exalted Mars, exalted Jupiter. So, you know, some great planets in this chart. However, both of those exalted planets are with nodes. And we know that when Mars is exalted in Capricorn, it actually gets very low Ayana bala. In fact, it generally gets low balas across the board. So often when Mars is exalted, it will be the 7th in Shadbala, which is the case in this chart as well. And when Mars is low in Ayana bala, it's more likely to fight for fighting's sake, rather than have that kind of noble, only getting involved in the the highest and most important conflicts. So it's a little bit more warmongering when it's in Capricorn, theoretically, based on our understanding of Ayana bala. And what else do we notice as well? That not only is Mars getting 0 points out of 60 for Ayana bala, the moon is also getting 0 points up there in Gemini. And when the moon is low in Ayana bala, it gets stuck in values. It sticks its heels in and it wants things to be the way that it wants things. So when it's got a high score in Ayana bala, we see the moon being receptive, and it's kind of like, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Like, how can we rectify the situation? How can we find solutions to this problem? And it's willing to adapt and flow and do whatever it takes to kind of grease the wheels of relationships, diplomacy, whatever it is, because that will move this conflict to a place of resolution. So the moon has that ability to do that. But when it's low in Ayana bala, it is dry and kind of stuck, and wants principles and ideals to be adhered to. And so the ideals of the moon, it wants to see those in reality. And it kind of almost has a tantrum in some ways about wanting to see that those ideals implemented purely here on Earth. And that sometimes you hear that this will not stand. This will not stand is in some ways a great move low in Ayana bala phase. And so you can see how this also when we have that karma coming in, strong karma coming in, we all know that if we can stay present and just absorb the moment, just be in the moment, the karma kind of, it dies, it resolves itself, so it's all expressed. But of course, if we retaliate, if we react, we harden and come back, then we just bounce that karma around, and now it's flowing in the other direction, and then it'll flow back again and flow back. It's like tennis, I suppose. So why do we see that in this moment of September 11th, there is the desire to get justice? We can certainly attribute some of it to the moon here. And if you think about what was passed in terms of permission for the president to take action, it was like a carte blanche, which is very unusual for the US to give a kind of open-ended permission to do whatever it takes to achieve whatever the president thinks is important on this issue. It was very, very large scale, maybe a little undefined. And of course, we also see not only that, but Saturn has low Ayana bala on this day at this time as well. And unfortunately, Saturn and Mars are partners with each other. So in Shadbala, we always have planets who are pairs, or at least looking after each other. So if one is low and the other is strong, we can make up for it. But here we see both partners of like grit, Mars and Saturn. They are just the real world dealers. They're here, they're the malefics to kind of get us through the tough times in this chart. Although we've got exalted Mars, although we've got exalted Jupiter, we just happen to have this weakness at the Ayana bala level where both partners, Mars and Saturn, are both low. Saturn, unfortunately, when it's low in Ayana bala, we do dumb things, because Saturn's not the brightest planet, it's a dull planet. So we kind of act without thinking. And without that vision, that inspiration, that dharma that would come if Saturn was functioning better. So I think these moments in time are really interesting. I think looking back at history is just so fascinating as an astrologer, because you're trying to understand everything that's going on. So that when you see in a client's chart and they say, what's going to happen with this relationship situation or this work conflict, we want to look at something like this and see what that moment in time, that potential of that moment in time, how that plays out over a year over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. So this documentary series on Netflix certainly gives the astrologer a chance to reflect on all those things. And I hope that it's interesting to you also to think about how planets work with their Shadbala and how important that is to the makeup of a chart. So I look forward to your thoughts in the comments and in our conversations over the coming weeks and months. Thanks for being here on the channel, and I look forward to seeing you the next time we do a video together. Okay, bye.